If you believe the story I am about to relate, I salute you. I have been endlessly mocked by the staff at this bug house for protesting my innocence since I was first incarcerated. Finally, I have possession of precious pencil and paper to share my sad and sorry tale. Believe what you will. I make no apology for the God's own truth. Between 1788 and 1868, well over 150,000 undesirables were transported from Great Britain to the colonies. Generally assumed to be convicts all, many arrived without ever being convicted of anything and were simply deemed to be an embarrassment to the British Empire. Female impersonators amongst their number. One such was my old man, Willie Dolly McCoy, known to his adopted community as Billy Buster McCoy. He was to remain to his intimates as Dolly. Transportation to Australia provided Dad, an industrious bloke from a farming background, with the opportunity of a new start in life. And in due course, he set about making the most of his new homeland. Having served his time of penal servitude, Dad went on to establish a small-scale farm in the food-obsessed colony, initially over 30 acres, where he cultivated orchards and vineyards in a major fruit-growing area along the northern coastal strip of Queensland. But it wasn't until 1878, when the tropical fruits, such as bananas, pineapple and avocados, were first introduced into the region, that he came into his own. Seizing the opportunity, Dad jumped on the bandwagon in no time at all. His reputation as a bonza banana vendor would become legendary, while his plump, ripe avocados were beyond compare. By the end of 1883, there were over 200 acres in cultivation, the success of his endeavours having encouraged Governor Edgar Walsing to grant father additional land, livestock, agricultural tools and seed, and also to assign convict workers and emancipists willing to farm into his employ. As the population increased, so did the need for fruit growing to keep pace, and Governor Walsing was wise enough to recognise it. Throughout all his ventures, Dad was ably assisted by his bosom pal, Big Len Bolick, with whom he had forged a tight friendship since they had first shared a hammock on the HMS Tittyfold on their transport from Blighty in 1868. Len and Dad built a new farmstead as befitting a successful plantation at Nobby's Hole, in one of the most pleasant spots of that region. Built mainly of Murray or Cypress pine slab with shingle roofs, internal walls were lined with pine boards and the main home finished with calico and floral wallpaper. Various outbuildings were constructed over the years, the bunkhouse for stockmen amongst them, and all surrounded by a pastoral landscape they had lovingly cultivated. Impressed by father's growing fortune, Governor Walsing then insisted Dad take the hand of his youngest daughter Matilda. As a lifelong bachelor and well into his 40s by then, it came as something of a shock to Dad's intimates when he agreed to the marriage. But Mum would prove to be equally fruitful, rewarding father with 16 sons, one each calendar year, of whom I, David, am the eldest. At a loss for female company in that all-male environment, Mum recruited me as her confidant and would frequently bemoan the fact that there were 3 people in her marriage: herself, Dad and Len. She had never recovered, she claimed, from the 3 of them sharing a bed on her honeymoon night due to Dad being too tight to pay for a separate room, and resented Len still for taking up permanent residence at the foot of their bed thereafter. Nevertheless, she suffered Len's presence for love of my father, but begrudged it constantly. Mother, it need to be said, was considered quite the stunner and was often the object of the unwelcome attentions of the bad lads employed on the plantation. But Dad fiercely defended her honour with Len ever ready as his bullish ally. Until that day, in my 18th year, when Len mysteriously disappeared. There had been a ruckus, I understand, involving Len and a group of transient workers with whom Mother had been seen dancing and cavorting to the strains of a gypsy violin in my father's absence at market. Len had dismissed them, every last blackguard, after a heated argument, but shortly thereafter his absence at the foot of the bed sent Dad into a mad panic. His continued disappearance made my father's spirits plummet still further, and in an effort to raise them, Mum suggested a family picnic on the Sunday following as a distraction. The 16 of us were duly bundled into the back of the wagon, and Mother set out with Father riding alongside. On the coastal perimeter, half a mile or so from the farmstead, the country begins to rise again, and it was here, perched on a curious cliff's edge, in a spot known locally as Low Hangers, due to the proliferation of she-oak trees whose verdant branches gave the location its name, that my mother selected a place for us to off-saddle and picnic. She had barely time to spread a tartan blanket under the shade of a particularly fecund evergreen and begin to empty the wicker picnic basket before Dad cried out, "Look, what's that?" All eyes followed in the direction in which he was pointing, and to our utter amazement saw the figure of a man running among the rocks, a big hairy bogan, naked as the day he was born, his manly attributes slapping this way and that in his haste. "Ooh, this is a day of surprises," my mother twittered. "Alas, I don't think I have prepared enough sandwiches." And as the figure approached still further, "It's Len!" Father cried. "Good Lord, it's Len!" We continued to watch the threatening apparition as it rapidly approached. Or was it to flee? Along the cusp of the cliff, snarling like a rabid dingo, more animal than man. Then just as suddenly, he tottered to the left and tripped over the edge of the cliff, falling to his death on the rocks far, far, far below. No sooner were his gut-wrenching screams silenced than I swear to you I could see, or thought I could see, the shadowy forms of men moving at a distance across the plain, adding an additional element of horror to the proceedings. I could hear Dad's grief-stricken wailing at my rear, and for my own part I felt my blood run cold. It took all 17 of us to pin Dad down so that he did not jump to join his mate over the cliff's edge, so bereft was he at the alarming spectacle. "I've had enough of this," cried Father, struggling in vain to throw us aside. "I'm crook to me guts." As we sat atop him, the grog bottle was plucked from his pocket and passed around. The stimulant worked its wonders. We racked our fevered brains to find some explanation of what we had seen or had fancied we saw, but it was impossible. The summer haze might have blurred our vision, but it could not be held accountable for those grotesque figures that had danced upon the horizon before retreating into the shimmering heat to the distant strains of a gypsy violin. "Street," said Mum at last. "I know that I never want to see such things again. I reckon we clear out pronto." Restraining Dad with a length of rope, we placed him in the back of the wagon. My siblings clambered aboard as Mother took the reins and headed home without so much as a backward glance. I took charge of Dad's horse. I wouldn't have stayed longer in that godforsaken place for all the tea in China. We arrived back at the homestead where Father was to be further restrained upon his bed for fear of him causing injury to himself. Mother, ever the dutiful wife, removed his gag and force-fed him with the salmon paste sandwiches she had prepared for the picnic to ensure that they did not go to waste. Alas, he choked to death shortly thereafter. A short time later, the doctor was called who certified death by salmon sanger. Once unshackled, Father's body was carried to one of the outhouses and laid out to await the undertaker, whilst my poor bereft mum, refusing to sleep alone, begged me to take up position at the end of the bed in the very spot Len had only so recently vacated, and where his scent still lingered like that of a damp dog. I was forced then to drift off to sleep to the sound of her racking sobs. It was in the dead of night that I was awoken by the stirrings outside. The window slid open and the shutter was raised, and there in the moonlight, I saw him. The luminous figure of Big Len Bolick. His still naked body, tensed and muscular, crossed the room, and I shrank back in horror as he reached out his powerful arms, wrapped his huge hairy hands around Mother's throat, and strangled her to death, crying, "Waltzing's Matilda! You'll not go waltzing Matilda again." Once Mother had stopped gurgling and thrashing about, and her attacker was content, he strode to the end of the bed and looked down at me with darkly malevolent eyes. "And you," he ejaculated forcefully, "shut your gob, or I will be back." It was my grim misfortune to keep his counsel and so to be incarcerated for matricide. But I can contain the truth no longer. But wait! There is something forcing itself through the iron bars of my cell. Oh no! Dear God! It's